I hope you enjoy my stories. Instead of just clicking thumbs down, please comment and share how we can do better. If you do like our video, then please like and subscribe.
The HOA that surrounds my family farmland has a low, decorative wall along the public roadway. For Christmas, they put up white Christmas lights that do not blink. My wife purchased some high-tech Christmas lights and put them up on our wall, only along the roadway, and they were also non-blinking white lights. The HOA seemed happy and we heard nothing from them about our lights. Until Christmas Eve, just as the sun went down, my wife turned on the Christmas lights and adjusted the remote controller, and to even my surprise, the light switched from simple non-blinking white lights and became multicolored: reds, blues, greens, yellows, and whites, and they were blinking. Oh, how this set the HOA off. By 9 p.m., the HOA president started calling and demanding we take down our lights and put the white lights back up. To keep the image of the road the same, he claimed. He seems to forget that we are not a member of the HOA. These calls continued every hour or half hour until after midnight, when I simply turned off the phone. Wife did put it back to all white non-blinking lights in morning on Christmas Day. But she is enjoying switching the colored blinking lights on for an hour each night. How big the fine will be for this is not yet known. But thankfully we are still not part of this HOA and not beholden to the CC&Rs or their fines. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and hope everyone has a safe, prosperous 2021. Now on to what happened on New Year's Eve. Hopefully everyone has popcorn made. Update 1. After everything that my family has been through with the neighboring HOA since 2016, my wife, and love of my life, has taken it upon herself to antagonize the HOA's board of directors. For starters, my family's farm is 1,850 acres and is along a dog-legged road. The HOA surrounds my farm, and the farm is under no obligations to join or conform to the HOA. Now, the HOA has a 4-foot-high wall along the public roadway, and these walls are painted white and have been decorated with non-flashing white lights and some no-frills garland. The HOA completely surrounds our farm. They are to our right and left, they are behind us, and all the land across the road is HOA controlled. My wife has had a lot of time due to the virus. So she studied up and ordered a large amount of high-tech Christmas lights, which she used to decorate the 6-foot-high wall on our property, only along the roadway. And she had them on as non-blinking white lights. Until on Christmas Eve, the lights she installed started blinking and changing colors. They would blink fast and then slow. The HOA president was not amused. He began calling my phone multiple times per hour from 9 p.m. until midnight, when I turned my phone off. Christmas morning, my wife returned the lights to non-blinking white lights only. Except, for about an hour each night, the light would magically change colors and flash. I was quietly informed by several residents of the HOA that a meeting was held at the president's house to deal with our lights. New Year's Eve, my wife sent the kids to visit friends and she went to work. I did not know how many lights she had. Prior to New Year's, she had lights strung on our wall facing toward the house. Now she moved everything over the wall onto the street side. Further, she added lights onto the decorative gate we have across the driveway. There was some boxes brought out and placed behind the wall. Oh, and she relocated several pieces of farm equipment right behind the wall, along with pallets, trailers, and the pickup trucks. What is she doing, I wondered. Darkness sets in. The HOA's white lights come on and my wife keeps ours off. 8 p.m. There are neighbors walking along the road, and across the road along the HOA's wall they are just waiting to see what will happen. 9 p.m. I get a call from the HOA president asking what we are doing and telling me how unsafe it is to have so many people gathered along the road. At 10 p.m. my wife has still not turned on the lights. However, at 10:15 p.m. she goes out with the ATV and stops along the wall in a couple places, and at about 10:30 p.m. the non-blinking white lights come on. Until 11:30 p.m. the lights slowly fade to black, taking about 5 minutes. As the countdown to midnight starts, the lights flash on and off. At midnight, a massive light show takes place. Now there are lights that seems to run the entire wall. Picture a wave at a sporting event, but along the road the most spectacular show takes place. She has been working for days to get all this done. Yes, there were some fireworks, but not as many as most would like. Now at the time, I was not aware that my wife had everything linked to Christmas and New Year's music which could be heard if you tuned into a particular FM station. And my wife has even added some messages praising the HOA and saying how none of this show would have been possible without the HOA's support. There was so much more. The gate to our driveway opened and closed by itself, and lights came on flashing away on the gates and archway overhead. Several trees were decorated with lights. Inflatables started popping up. Santa, his sleigh and reindeer. Frosty the Snowman, elves everywhere. Father Time appeared near the driveway. An 8-feet-high Grinch inflates facing the HOA's main entrance. And my phone started ringing. I wonder who that can be. Mr. HOA president said he was calling police to report us. Yes, he did. Now my wife is smart. She researched what she could do and what she could not do. And she stayed within the law. And she had informed law enforcement of her plans and to expect the HOA president to call. And for safety, a deputy had driven past our home several times during the evening. At about 1:45 a.m., every light she put up started flashing in so many colors. Faster and faster these lights flashed until, at 2 a.m., everything went dark. And, after 5 minutes, the non-blinking white lights slowly faded back on. And they stayed on like that until sunrise. I found out that the final message in the FM site was my wife's voice telling everyone listening to thank the HOA for this wonderful show. I love my wife and hear craziness. I so wish I had thought about doing all this. I will update if there is any reaction from the HOA, but, due to our last legal dealing, the HOA is ordered to have no contact with us. My real estate attorney will likely laugh herself silly over this. We shall see. Update 2. After my wife and I purchased a pair of motorcycles, we expected to receive a significant number of letters from the HOA's president. However, that did not happen. I was out by the main road doing some cleaning and landscaping when the vice president of the HOA stopped and apologized for everything that has happened. Turns out the president contracted COVID-19 and due to some health issues he passed away. The president had been informing the rest of the board of directors that a deal for purchase of my property was in the works. As of now, the HOA is changing and I am hopeful that all these issues are behind me.
After my previous story about Christmas lights and my family farmland and the surrounding HOA, I have been asked to share a short story about some of the incidents that have happened. This is from a few years ago. I am in Florida and on mobile, so please excuse format issues. The rehash? My great-grandfather purchased 3,000 acres in Florida in the 1800s. It has been in the family and a working farm ever since. After my father passed, the land was divided between my brother and sister and me. My brother and sister sold their portions to a development company. And at the same time, I purchased a neighboring 850 acres. On to the story. After the development company built up the area with single-family home, they transferred control to a new HOA, which became officially registered in 2016. It was at this time that unstamped letters began appearing in my mailbox. The first was an introduction of the new HOA and included about a 20-page CC&R that were essentially a contract and had so many rules and regulations. Since my family land predates the HOA by well over 120 years, I am not obliged to join any such group. So I ignore the letters and start marking them. Return to sender. Now this alerts my postal carrier, who questions who put unstamped mail in the mailbox. And he took those letters and went to have a conversion with the HOA about illegal use of the mailbox. Now while this is a farm, I was not using it fully, but instead I had at the time about a dozen rescue animals, as well as 3/4 horses. I arrived home to find a pair of cars at the entrance of my driveway blocking my access. My driveway is almost 1/4 mile long, so I parked and walked. At my house, I found my wife arguing with 3 people, 2 men and a woman, who were demanding to be allowed their rights to search my property inside and out. After a quick briefing, I informed my trespassers of their violations. I then give them 10 minutes to get off my property and move their cars before I tow and impound them. These self-rigorous individuals were not budging. So I walk to one of my barns and start up something inside, and back out with an older model Holmes tow truck and start backing down the driveway. These three ran to get into their cars and were gone before I got to the end of the driveway. Now this would be nice if it ended there, but then it would not be much of a story. I started receiving fines. Yes, in the mail and unstamped. Actually had to get the local postmaster involved. Illegal use of the mail system and mailboxes are a part of that or a federal crime. I even got a fine for calling the postmaster on them. The HOA had to pay a $10,000 fine for unauthorized use of the USPS system. Fast forward about 6 months, and my wife notices that there is a lien on the house and property. This is where I contacted a property rights attorney, who immediately filed with the local government and finance agencies our dispute to the legality of this lien. It took a couple months, but the lien was dismissed when the originator failed to show up to a hearing. But it does not end here. Oh no, it does not. I received a large packet that came certified mail, detailing all the fines I have incurred since the HOA came into existence. And they demanded immediate payment. Included in this was a $500 fine for not signing the CC&Rs. $1,000 fine for not allowing board members access to search my property. $10,000 fine for repayment of fine. The HOA had to pay for the HOA breaking federal law. And the list goes on and on. My attorney laughed and sent a cease and desist letter, as well as a demand that all further correspondence must be direct to her office. That lasted about 6 months until my wife again noticed a new lien on the property. WTF. So back to my attorney and more laughing. Turns out the HOA put a lien on the land I purchased, which is still separate from the family land. And so we repeat the steps above. During this time, while my wife was in hospital for delivery of our second child, and everyone was there to support her, the HOA trespassed again, and started searching through my property, including its barns, garage, and outbuildings. They even tried towing several vehicles that I had on the land that were not licensed. Yeah, they are for farm use. Picture: a rusty old pickup used to haul hay and feed. An old car with no doors we used to check out the field and search for animals. Now they were caught in the act by the local sheriff's deputy who was just doing a drive-by. No one was arrested, and I choose not to press charges. However, this infuriated the HOA, and another large packet arrived with more fines on top of all the previous fines. Another trip to my attorney and more laughing, and this time she contacts the county clerk's office and manages to stop another lien that was in the process of being posted. This time, in order to post the lien, the HOA would need to show up at a hearing and explain. Yep, they did not show and lien vanished. Now just a reminder, this is in Florida, and my family and property are not part of any HOA. Hope everyone enjoyed. This happened over a year ago during the height of the pandemic in mid-2020. I'm 29 male and am a homeowner. I bought a house in 2019 from my uncle because he was well set and wanted to retire to his second home by a lake. Before buying the house, my uncle warned me that the neighborhood has an HOA, but it only affects those who joined it. And my uncle did not. But the price my uncle was offering was half the home's value. I couldn't pass up the offer. So I bought a house in an HOA neighborhood that wasn't a part of the HOA. Right after I moved in, I got a knock at the door. And when I opened it, I was greeted by an older woman with short-grained blonde hair and face covered in thick makeup, and was holding a welcome to the neighborhood gift basket. She introduced herself as the president of the HOA, then asked to come in so she could help me fill out some forms. I knew what she was trying to do because my uncle warned me. She did this to every new homeowner in the area who wasn't a part of the HOA, so I quickly and bluntly stated I was not going to join her HOA. Her smile quickly disappeared, and she started saying that I did not have a choice, as all new homeowners are mandated. I told her I knew in advance that was a total lie and that I will not be paying any dues or fines, and will be ready to call a lawyer if I have to. She called me a thorn to the neighborhood and said she'd be back, though we did not speak to each other for some time. I expected her to start sending me fines in the mail, but the most I usually got were letters stating that my grass was getting too tall or my driveway needed sweeping. Those never bothered me because they are normal home chores and need to be done regularly anyway. But several neighbors that were on the HOA side made it clear they didn't like me because I didn't join, just like my uncle.
I said that was fine. We're neighbors, but we don't have to be friends.
They said that was fine too because I'm an outsider and they'll never accept me until I join the HOA later in early 2020. I got word from a friend that people were starting to buy a lot of disinfectant, toilet paper, and hand sanitizer en masse.
I decided the best option was to order these things online. I got 8 big 12 packs of toilet paper, a case of 20 bottles of hand sanitizer, 3 boxes of disposable latex gloves, a couple of boxes of disposable face masks, and a case of 20 large cans of name-brand disinfectant spray.
I set for the delivery to be signed for only as I did not trust anyone not to steal my packages if they were just left on my porch.
When the packages were delivered, several neighbors saw me getting lots of toilet paper and some other packages that contained the other stuff.
And just because I'm paranoid guy, I still bought more of the same stuff when I saw it in stores. Like those small cheap 4 packs of toilet paper or off-brand disinfectant sprays. I bought them because I had a feeling some friends or family might need some soon.
And I was right. As expected, toilet paper, disinfectant, and sanitizer pretty much disappeared from store shelves for miles around.
And people were fighting over HOA hoarding it. Meanwhile, I got a very generous supply that I still haven't come close to using up. Though word of my supply got around fast when people started needing some. A friend of mine ran out of toilet paper and had no hand sanitizer. So I gave him a couple of the generic 4 packs of toilet paper and a bottle of sanitizer at my door.
A few family members ran out too, and I shared with them as well.
They were all extremely grateful. But I ended up with several neighbors knocking on my door and asking to buy my supply or wanting handouts.
But I refused and said I only gave some of what I had away to friends and family. And they made it pretty clear to me before that we'd never be friends since I refused to join the HOA. So if I were to give some to one neighbor, they'd all want my supplies. And then I'd run out really fast. They didn't like this and harassed me several times from the sidewalk.
But I just ignored them.
Later, the HOA Karen showed up at my door and told me several neighbors had run out of all the items that this post is about.
Then said she wasn't asking, but demanding I share my stock with my neighbors to set a good example.
I told her to buzz off because that had nothing to do with me. I may be a jerk, but I'm a well-prepared jerk.
And I've read her HOA bylaws online. So even if I was a member of her HOA, which I was not, I wouldn't have to give up my stock either way. She left while yelling at me that one day I'd regret not being a good neighbor or being a part of her HOA. The next time I went to work, I was notified around noon by the cameras I had at my house that there was a thief breaking into my home. I could see video of them on my smartphone, and it looked like a woman in a spandex suit with her face covered by a hockey mask. I called the police immediately and was allowed to clock out at work so I could rush home. Right around the time I got there, the cops were walking HOA Karen out in handcuffs to a police cruiser.
She'd broken into my home by using a crowbar to force open the back door and was tossing all of my toilet paper and any other supplies she could grab out into my backyard, where her kids were picking it up and bagging it. I pressed charges and HOA Karen got 6 months in jail and probation. HOA Karen's husband called me to apologize for his wife and told me that he had been planning a divorce for a while because this isn't the first time she's been in trouble with the law, and CPS got involved too because she was using her kids to help steal from me. So he was going to file for full custody in the divorce. HOA Karen didn't return, and someone new was elected HOA president in her place.
Her husband didn't move, and I see him from time to time.
And there's no hard feelings between us? And yes, he did get full custody of his kids because his wife had a longer history with the law than I thought.
We're sort of friends now too, as we've occasionally had a beer together, and he helped me replace my back door that his ex broke. I'm making this post more than a year later because I just saw HOA Karen again. I was visiting some friends in another city and saw her working at the local supermarket there, bagging groceries. As soon as we saw each other, she obviously recognized me because she scowled and refused to look at me again the entire time I was there.
Karma is a real bitch, isn't it, Karen?
About 25 years ago, my aunt and uncle moved into a new construction single-family home neighborhood on a half-acre. About 6 months after they moved in, he was informed that his neighborhood was being taken over by an HOA. He disregarded his HOA application as he did not wish to join.
Not long after this, random neighbors began complaining to him directly about his boat and cars in his driveway violating HOA rules.
He just informed the often rude people that he was not a member. They would argue with him that everyone was a member.
One of the major issues is that his driveway, garage and front yard was on the main level of his home, and the backyard dropped down a cliff to level with his basement and backyard.
So he had no way to back his boat around the side of the home into the backyard.
Eventually, the HOA began harassing him with threats if he didn't move his boat to the backyard.
His backyard had been closed off by a vinyl fence the HOA installed and lined another road back there.
So one day, my uncle decided to compromise by trying to take down a section of his back fence so he could make a gate for boat parking access. The HOA called the police on him for destruction of property.
The police left my uncle with a warning if the fence was returned to proper condition by the end of the day.
Uncle put the fence back up and placed his boat back in his front driveway. As the weeks turned into months, the situation escalated with relentless fines accumulating. Each week seemed to bring a new demand, each month a larger sum to pay. The tension reached a breaking point when the fines reached an astronomical $10,000.
Faced with what seemed like an insurmountable financial burden, my uncle found himself embroiled in a legal battle with the HOA.
In a bold move, the HOA took the matter to court, seeking legal recourse for what they deemed as flagrant violations of the community's regulations. Their case was meticulously prepared, presenting evidence of the HOA's boundaries, which clearly showed my uncle's house situated squarely within its jurisdiction. The HOA representatives detailed the nature of the infractions, citing specific clauses from the community's regulations that had been allegedly breached. Additionally, they highlighted a police report that had been filed regarding an incident involving my uncle's back fence, further bolstering their case.
Undeterred by the formidable opposition, my uncle mounted a robust defense, countering the accusations with a bold assertion of his rights.
He brought forth evidence to support his claim of harassment, citing instances where he felt unfairly targeted by the HOA's enforcement measures. Moreover, he raised a compelling argument regarding access to his backyard, arguing that his property rights were being infringed upon by restrictions imposed by the HOA. As the courtroom drama unfolded, both sides presented their arguments with fervor, each vying for a favorable outcome. The proceedings were fraught with tension as the fate of my uncle's property and his standing within the community hung in the balance. My uncle's defense was rooted in a fundamental principle: he had never willingly consented to be governed by the HOAtions.
He recounted how he had moved into the neighborhood long before the establishment of the HOA, at a time when such regulations did not exist.
When the HOA was formed, he had not volunteered to become a member, nor had he signed any documents indicating his acceptance of its authority.
Moreover, he adamantly asserted that he had never granted permission for his backyard to be enclosed within the confines of the HOA's boundaries.
To support his claims, my uncle meticulously presented a trove of evidence. He produced documentation pertaining to his mortgage, which predated the existence of the HOA, as well as a blank HOA application form bearing the HOA's official stamp and date. This compelling evidence seemed to suggest that, contrary to the HOA's assertions, my uncle had never willingly entered into any agreement with the association.
However, the HOA was unwavering in its stance, arguing that my uncle's failure to submit an application was inconsequential in light of the fact that his property fell within the HOA's designated borders.
According to their interpretation, residency within the HOA's jurisdiction automatically subjected him to its rules and regulations, regardless of his explicit consent or lack thereof. The courtroom atmosphere crackled with tension as these opposing arguments clashed head-on.
On one side stood my uncle, steadfast in his assertion of individual rights and autonomy, while on the other loomed the formidable presence of the HOA, determined to assert its authority over the community. The outcome of this legal battle would not only determine my uncle's fate, but also set a precedent for the delicate balance between individual freedoms and community governance within the neighborhood.
The judge declared my uncle's property was grandfathered as private property and not part of the HOA.
The HOA was to immediately take down their illegal fence on the back border of my uncle's lot.
Since the HOA had fined my uncle $10,000 in illegal fines, my uncle was owed $10,000 in damages for the harassment.
My uncle rebuilt his yard fence in see-through chain link with a gate where he parks all his toys in full view. He moved the boat from the driveway to his front lawn, let the lawn die, and paved it over, all 10 feet from his front door to the sidewalk.
HOA neighbors in the decades since still approach him to complain, and he just tells them to take a walk, knowing there is nothing they can do to him.
So this happened almost 10 plus years ago, but has cemented my hatred for HOAs. My family is from Guam, a small Pacific island and U.S. territory, where there isn't much if any HOAs. We moved stateside around 2001-2002 when my dad decided he wanted to. My parents had good jobs and made good money and decent credit.
We lived in Tennessee for a while, until we drove up to Indiana to visit some family. I guess my dad liked it so much, he decided to move there.
Well, after my parents got transferred to their business Indiana branch, a few months later we moved there.
Our house was very modest, but a bit more extra than most because it was a part of an HOA.
A few months living there, my dad noticed a crack in the garage, poor foundation, and notified our builder.
The HOA was still being built, so he was easy to find.
The builder said he'd take a look. Come to find out that not only was the foundation poorly set, but the plot of land it was sinking.
Screwed up thing. One, my parents were told that in order to fix it, it would cost more than their home loan because of the condition of the land it was on. The builder suggested that they pay him 25% cash of the home's value, and he'll build them a new house with their current mortgage cut down 25% as a good faith gesture. Screwed up thing too.
As you're reading this, you're probably thinking, that can't be right. That's not legal. That's not how that works. Well, you're right. But being from a small island where you can trust someone at their word, it didn't occur to my parents to question it or get legal advice.
Anyways, back to the story?
So our new house is built nicer than our previous home and not sinking.
Life is good for a while until we had to go on an extended trip due to family emergency.
Luckily, at this point, we've been living there for years and my parents made some friends.
We would have just left, but one of their friends let them know that they needed to inform the HOA that some lawn and garden standards wouldn't be kept due to the trip. Yes, my parents should have read the bylaws, but at first they were excited to own a home, so they never did.
At the time of the emergency, they weren't thinking about anything but getting back to Guam.
Back to the story.
So my parents, still thinking that a face-to-face with the HOA board would be good enough, did just that.
Told them during a HOA meeting, that's it.
Well, our trip took a little while longer than expected. The whole summer and part of the first school year, but we finally got home. Waiting at our door was countless letter, warnings, fines, and more fines. Screwed up thing 3. I don't exactly remember was the total was, but it really doesn't matter. My parents were broke. They spent their savings getting us to and from Guam and paying the mortgage, so yay, no back fund.
My parents went straight to the HOA for answers.
Basically, it boiled down to they didn't notify the HOA of the reason for the drop in standards, so they were well within their rights to post fines, and the worst part, put a lien on our home.
My parents barely covered the mortgage and the trip to Guam. They tried reasoning with them until eventually they went to court. As you're guessing from the title, it didn't go well. The HOA board hung on to the fact that my parents didn't send an email and wait for board approval. They won.
My parents were forced to pay the lien while also paying the mortgage. At first, my parents were optimistic, but it got to the point where it was pay the mortgage, fines, or feed my brothers, and they fell further behind and were starting to fight about it. It became too much for them, so they had to walk away from our home. My mom was devastated and my dad felt like a failure. I was old enough to understand what was going on, but my brothers didn't know why we had to leave our home. The whole ordeal destroyed my parents' credit, wiped out their savings, and cost my parents their good jobs. Mom's job in finances required good credit, and my dad had to work closer to home because of the financial situation. I don't think there's any way they can recover from what they walked away from, but they're not fighting and don't have to choose between paying rent and feeding my brother.
The whole experience made me really hate HOAs. While I understand why they are needed, and in some cases make complete sense, I will never move my family into one if I can help it.
I'm a 41 male. At an inexperienced age of 25 years and a bachelor, I grew tired of living in a low-rent apartment surrounded by less than lawful individuals and decided that a mortgage at the time would be only a little more per month and would make a great investment. Oh, to go back in time and give myself a talk, because what I learned was that living in an HOA only makes you a glorified renter. At the end of the day, you own nothing. The condo I purchased was very nice. 1,300 square feet, 3-bedroom and 2 baths, vaulted ceilings, thick walls. I was pretty impressed with myself. Unfortunately, the HOA was not well managed. The board was nothing more than puppets for the management company, who might as well been the landlord. It was a large HOA, 26 buildings with 12 units each. I learned in comparison to friends that this was a good thing, as it meant assessment fees were more spread out. When I moved in, I didn't know about assessment fees and I was barely educated on the HOA fee. One of the selling points was the low HOA fee. Only $80 a month. But later I found out the developer, who was still finishing the last 4 buildings, supplemented the fee to keep it low so he could sell more units. I also didn't know that my HOA was a sub-HOA, which means it was an HOA inside an HOA, so I had to pay the master HOA another $25 a month to do nothing at all. Literally nothing but the privilege of living in an HOA that was part of a collection of other HOAs. The sub-HOAs did all the internal maintenance, and the city itself took care of the HOA communal areas like the public roads. Meanwhile, my sub-HOA board was full of out-of-state Southern Californians in a snow-heavy state. My first year there, they budgeted $2,000 for snow removal and $45,000 for beautification, new wood chips, and remodel the clubhouse. Meanwhile, the snow removal fee came to $35,000. At the HOA meeting to vote on how to pay the $35,000 snow fee, they banned anyone from talking about how we got into that mess, and anyone who did was arrested for disorderly conduct by the police standing by, on request of the management company. Eventually, they voted on an assessment fee which came to $350-ish for each unit. Later I learned the plow company was owned by the management company owner's relative. That plow guy came out if there was a barely visible frost on the ground and charged us $100 per push, every time he backed up and drove forward. Eventually, the HOA board was replaced and they replaced the management company with a new company. The new company liked to play with the pool keys and charge you to turn them back on. They always tried to claim your card was read at the pool during an unauthorized time, or that card you were using was a fake that they didn't issue. The 2008 recession hit without selling the last of the units. The developer backed out of supplementing the fees, and the fee jumped $65 and $10 the next year. Probably even higher later, but I moved out. The developer screwed up and didn't have room to give the last building or so their 2 parking spots, one covered. So now the HOA wanted to revoke everyone's second spot. Problem: the second spot was on my mortgage and bylaws provided for a second spot. The HOA dropped the revoked spot idea, but I do not know how they eventually solved it. Last, I overpaid my HOA every month for dues, placing me several hundred over as insurance against the next assessment fee. So I paid a little amount for the HOA to install a screen on my dryer vent to keep the birds out against my credit. I also paid for several upgrades inside to sell the place. Unfortunately, when I tried to sell, the recession was at its worst and I sold at a loss to get out of there and buy a house. The last insult of this HOA was to claim I never paid for the screen on my dryer vent and that I owed a few hundred in back HOA fees. If I didn't pay, they would place a lien on me, which would mess with the condo I sold and the house I was buying. So I paid the ransom and walked away from that dumpster fire. The good news is the house I bought was no HOA and has tripled in value. I do know the master HOA was eventually sued by all the sub-HOAs and dissolved because they did nothing but rent an office down the street. I've also ran into people who still own in my old sub HOA, and yes, the fee is now much higher.
I have really learned to hate HOAs with a passion. For me, it was a case of everything falling apart all at once.
Okay, so I've made some bad life choices. Not too much I can do about that. I never thought I'd find myself tangled up in the mess that is a homeowners association. But here I am, knee-deep in chaos and regret. It all started when I made the mistake of marrying someone whose understanding of logic seemed to be a bit off. Let's call her my soon-to-be ex-wife. She had this grand plan of marrying me, living with me for a year, and then walking away with half of everything. Screw that. I had a prenup in place to protect my assets, including the house I'd bought just before our marriage.
As soon as she realized she wasn't going to get her hands on half of my belongings, she went off the deep end. She picked fights with everyone, including the HOA president, who we'll affectionately refer to as Karen. And trust me, the name fits perfectly.
Karen and my ex-wife went head-to-head, and it seemed like every day brought a new fine from the HOA. But instead of telling me about it, my ex just tossed the notices aside like they were nothing.
Fast forward 6 months, and I finally had enough of her antics. I kicked her out, but by then the damage was done. The HOA had slapped a lien on my house and was ready to seize it. I'll never forget the moment I came home to find my belongings strewn outside, alarms blaring, and a sheriff lurking around. It was like something out of a nightmare. But I wasn't about to go down without a fight. I called my lawyer, scrambled to shut off the alarms, and started pushing back against the HOA's onslaught. My defense? Lack of proper notification. And so began the legal battle of the century. In the midst of all this madness, I discovered a silver lining. Turns out, every time the HOA tried to enter the property, the alarms would go haywire. It was almost comical how their attempts were constantly thwarted by my trusty security system. The bank got wind of the chaos and swooped in, declaring themselves the primary lien holder on the property. My lawyer assured me this was a good thing, though I couldn't help but feel like I was drowning in paperwork and court dates. But I wasn't about to let the HOA off the hook that easily. Armed with tapes of Karen's tirades at my front door, I launched a counterattack, accusing them of harassment. And so the saga continues. The legal battle rages on, but one thing's for sure, it's going to be one heck of a ride. As I sifted through the piles of paperwork, trying to make sense of the legal jargon and mounting bills, I couldn't help but reflect on how drastically my life had changed. Just a year ago, I was blissfully unaware of the drama that lurked within the confines of homeowners associations. Now I was knee-deep in a battle for my home, my sanity, and my dignity. The days blurred together as I juggled court appearances, meetings with lawyers, and endless phone calls with the bank. Every waking moment was consumed by thoughts of the looming threat of losing my home, the one place that had always been my sanctuary from the chaos of the outside world. But amidst the chaos, there were moments of unexpected relief. Like the time I stumbled upon a loophole in the HOA's bylaws that could potentially turn the tide in my favor. Or the day I received a supportive message from a neighbor who had witnessed Karen's tirades firsthand and was willing to testify on my behalf. Even in the darkest of times, there was a glimmer of hope that kept me going. I refused to back down, determined to fight tooth and nail for what was rightfully mine. And with each small victory, I felt a renewed sense of strength and determination wash over me. But as the legal battle dragged on, I couldn't help but wonder how much longer I could keep up the fight. The mounting stress and financial strain were taking their toll, threatening to break me down when I needed to be stronger than ever. Yet in the face of adversity, I found an unexpected source of resilience within myself. I refused to let the HOA, or anyone else for that matter, dictate the outcome of my life. I had come too far to give up now, and I would see this fight through to the very end, no matter what it took. And so, armed with nothing but determination and a stubborn refusal to accept defeat, I braced myself for the next chapter in this roller coaster of a journey. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but I was ready to face them head-on, one legal battle at a time. Okay, it was pointed out to me that people still have some questions, so I will try to answer them.
I really can't talk much about the lawsuits because they are pending, but there are several, one against the Karen directly because she seems to, or it looks like, or it can look like she abused her power, and issued fines as retaliation against my now almost ex-wife.
The HOA itself for failing to notify me directly.
My wife was never listed on the deed, so informing her apparently doesn't count, or so I have been led to believe. I do have money. I own a great company that does quite well.
The financial burden I referred to is more in dealing with the value of the house. If I win the lawsuits, I may not be able to recover my legal from the other side. It gets tricky. I do not want to spend more on lawyers. The house is worth.
I was only planning on staying in the house for a couple of years, and then start building a better house on some property that is of course nowhere near an HOA. That plan has not changed. However, the wife will no longer be part of it. My lawyers are confident that will win. Well, me, not so much because sometimes shit goes sideways.
I will try to provide an update in the future. Update 1.
Well, the lawsuits are all done. I had the house back. The bad news is that I was still on the hook for all the lawyer bills, my lawyers. At best, I figured that I had broken even, and they basically paid the mortgage for all the time I wasn't allowed in my house.
Karen, bless her sweet heart, came over and apologized for all the trouble.
I said some bad words and slammed the door in her face. I later learned she was removed from the HOA board and may lose her house. The house is now listed for sale because I really have had enough. I had the property I was looking for and construction has begun.
Now the neighborhood my mother's house is in had an HOA that was disbanded in the late 90s for the pretty stereotypical reasons. Corrupt leaders, misappropriation of funds, etc.
I really don't have many details on it since I was very little when it went down. But my mother had apparently been openly aiming for a seat on the HOA council for years.
So she was really sore when the HOA was gone because she could no longer run for a position.
Fast forward to 2012. Evil Mama Bear had been trying to quote the old HOA covenants to the neighborhood for years and insisted that the rules and regulations set forth when the HOA was active should still be abided by.
Literally no one wanted to listen to her. So my mother started putting flyers around the neighborhood that detailed she was restarting the HOA without their approval and would be its first new president. The neighbors ended up in an uproar over this and showed up to her public meeting. And there she was verbally ripped to shreds as nearly every single homeowner in the neighborhood not only denied their support of another HOA, but also made it clear to her what she was trying to do was not legal.
My mother was incensed by this.
And no surprise, she didn't even have my father's support.
Which was something she'd initially been counting on.
But he refused from the onset of her scheme.
And when the neighborhood all refused to recreate the HOA, Evil Mama Bear went off on my dad for not being supportive of her. After she gaslighted herself into nearly being out of breath, my dad told her she was just looking for a way to lord over the neighborhood, and he'd never support that.
She tried to argue with him some more. But he just ended the conversation and walked away.
Somehow, that still didn't stop my mother, though.
She went and contacted a sleazy lawyer about trying to get the HOA running again without the support of the residents.
Her hope was that there was some sort of law that could reactivate the HOA on different grounds. The lawyer went through all of the old HOA documents and state laws over a couple of days and told my mother there was nothing that could be done as it was not enforceable, and that without the consent and signed support of enough people in the neighborhood, there was no way to legally restart the HOA. Then proceeded to bill Evil Mama Bear.
Since my mother hired the sleazy lawyer herself under the table, she had to pay him. But she hated paying anyone for anything because she was so cheap.
Now, an important fact of note was that my dad hadn't trusted Evil Mama Bear with his money for years, no longer kept joint bank accounts with her.
And she had no way to access his money.
So she filed for a new credit card using his name, and then used said credit card to pay the lawyer instead.
My dad noticed a new credit card statement in his name pretty fast, and nearly filed for fraud when my mother came clean out of fear. He demanded she pay out the credit card, and then have said card deactivated.
My mother didn't want to, but he threatened to call the fraud department of his bank on her.
I still remember hearing the argument where she tried to claim that he couldn't do that because they were married, and everything that was his was also hers. And that meant that she could do what she did and he'd still have to pay. Dad called bullshit on that, and said he'd contest the charges and get the card removed from his name, which would have left my mother in serious legal trouble for fraud and debt collection. And so evil Mama Bear begrudgingly paid off the money owed. And my dad cut the card to little pieces with scissors. My mother had the money to pay the lawyer all along. She just preferred to keep her cash and put any expenses she could on my father. But he always stopped her, and she tried to pull the shared assets logic because they were married.
Though that ended when they divorced.
Evil Mama Bear still spent the next few years trying to quote the HOA covenants to neighbors.
But she was always dismissed or laughed at every single time she tried.
A few people started referring to her as President Wannabe. To this day, no HOA has formed in the neighborhood again. And even if one did, they'd never vote an evil Mama Bear.
I can only imagine what would happen if she tried to pull this crap in Texas after she moves there. Edit. I've had a few people messaging me that the lawyer I spoke of in the story that my mother went to wasn't sleazy just by association with my mother and just did what normal lawyers do. Well, he was known by reputation to overcharge people. And my own lawyer told me some time ago that he had first-hand experience with the sleazy lawyer because he knew him in person. The guy would intentionally take longer than needed to do anything so he could charge more time from clients. That among other shady things, he did bit him in the butt some years ago and he shut down his office.
In a heart-wrenching tale of loss and determination, Rachel Lee, a resident of Virginia, has found herself embroiled in a contentious battle with her homeowners association after taking a drastic measure to ensure her family's safety.
It all began last July when tragedy struck the Lee household.
Alan Lee, Rachel's beloved husband, met a tragic end while innocently taking a shower, as a towering tree crashed through their home, claiming his life in a sudden and devastating manner. Reflecting on the profound impact of her husband's untimely demise, Rachel paints a poignant picture of a man deeply devoted to his family. "He was part of our everyday lives," she recalls, her voice tinged with both sorrow and resolve. "He was very invested in his kids and in me.
He just wanted to make sure everyone was happy all the time."
Driven by an unwavering commitment to protect her family from further harm, Rachel made the difficult decision to enlist the services of a contractor to rid her yard of any looming threats. With memories of the harrowing incident still fresh in her mind, she explains, "I don't want another one to fall on the house and orphan my kids or kill my kids." However, Rachel's proactive approach to safeguarding her loved ones has sparked a heated dispute with her HOA despite her earnest intentions. The association has taken a firm stance against the removal of trees from her property, citing regulations and guidelines that must be adhered to. As the conflict escalates, Rachel finds herself at a crossroads, torn between honoring her late husband's memory and navigating the complex web of rules imposed by the HOA in her quest for justice and safety. She remains steadfast, determined to forge a path forward that ensures the well-being of her family, even in the face of adversity. For Rachel Lee, the battle against the HOA is not merely about trees. It's a fight for the right to protect those she holds most dear.
Rachel Lee finds herself embroiled in a clash with her HOA over a seemingly innocuous backyard project.
Governed by strict regulations, the HOA mandates residents to seek approval via property improvement request for any exterior alterations. "I didn't ask permission because I wasn't going to not do it if they told me not to do it," Lee asserted, her resolve palpable.
It was going to happen no matter what.
Despite Lee's unilateral decision, the HOA has since bombarded her inbox with demands for retroactive submission of the requisite form.
Frustration laced her words as she questioned the necessity of such bureaucratic hurdles.
"I don't really see the point of a property improvement request for that," she mused.
"I don't want to go through the trauma to lay out a map of my backyard and where all the trees were."
Seeking clarity, reporters approached the HOA for comment, only to be met with a terse response. The property was private, and their presence unwelcome. However, in a statement to a reporter, the HOA expressed condolences for Lee's recent loss and emphasized their willingness to collaborate in ensuring adherence to property regulations.
Unyielding in her stance, Lee remains resolute in her refusal to acquiesce to the HOA's demands. "I don't need to go through trauma just because they want a piece of paper," she declared firmly. "It's unacceptable." In this quiet corner of Northern Virginia, a battle of wills rages on, emblematic of the tension between individual autonomy and communal governance. I never thought owning a home would become my worst nightmare.
It all started when my family and I moved into our cozy house in the suburbs.
Little did we know the homeowners association would soon become a source of endless stress and financial hardship.
At first, everything seemed fine.
We were excited to be part of a community where everyone seemed to look out for each other.
But as time went on, we began to notice some troubling signs.
The HOA started imposing exorbitant fees for things like landscaping and maintenance fees that seemed to increase every year without any explanation. At first, we tried to keep up with the payments, thinking it was just the cost of living in a well-maintained neighborhood. But soon enough, those fees started to pile up, eating away at our savings and leaving us struggling to make ends meet. Things took a turn for the worse when the HOA began imposing fines for minor infractions. If our grass was too long or if our mailbox wasn't up to their standards, we would receive a notice in the mail, along with a hefty fine.
It felt like we were constantly walking on eggshells, afraid to do anything that might incur the wrath of the HOA. But the worst was yet to come.
Desperate to keep up with the mounting costs, we turned to the HOA for help.
They offered us a loan with a sky-high interest rate, promising that it would help alleviate our financial burden.
Naively, we accepted, not realizing that we were only digging ourselves deeper into debt. As the months went by, it became increasingly clear that we were trapped in a vicious cycle of exploitation.
The HOA had us firmly in their grip, and there seemed to be no way out.
Our once happy home had become a prison, and we were prisoners of our own making.
But the breaking point came when we received a foreclosure notice in the mail. Despite our best efforts to keep up with the payments, we had fallen behind, and now our home was at risk of being taken away from us. It was a gut-wrenching realization, knowing that everything we had worked so hard for was on the line because of the greed and corruption of the HOA.
In a last-ditch effort to save our home, we sought legal help, but even that seemed futile in the face of the HOA's power and influence. They had deep pockets and a team of lawyers at their disposal while we struggled to make ends meet.
In the end, we lost our home.
It was a devastating blow, not just to our finances, but to our sense of security and stability.
We were forced to uproot our lives and start over, all because of the financial exploitation and abuse perpetrated by the very people who were supposed to be looking out for us.
Our story is just one of many, a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked power and greed.
We've been pushed to the brink by the HOA's relentless exploitation, left bitter and disillusioned by their callous disregard for our well-being. But despite the pain and suffering they've inflicted upon us, we refuse to cower in silence.
There are some talks in the wind right now about a class action lawsuit.
F the HOA, always every time.
With a return to form, I felt it the perfect time to share quite literally the worst HOA story I've ever heard. In this case, it involves the HOA at my father's old condo.
This happened about 10 years ago.
The community was mostly retired folk and other oldsters, mainly retired city workers, teachers, and professionals.
Each unit has a large 20-foot by 12-foot back deck and 1 to 2 small 3-foot by 6-foot front balconies. One day someone was horsing around on one of the back decks and a railing broke. This person demanded the HOA investigate their construction. The HOA board president hired a personal friend, a structural engineer, to conduct a survey. Sure enough, he found every single deck structurally deficient, according to him.
The HOA next announced they were writing a no-bid contract in the sum of $2.5 million to a contractor recommended by the engineer.
This equated to a roughly $10,000 per unit, special assessment for a teardown and rebuild of every single deck from the ground up. Issue number 1. For the work being conducted, the sum was ridiculous, roughly 1.5 to 2 times as much as it should have been for the work done. Many residents brought issue with the price and the no-bid nature of the contract, but were ignored or shot down at meetings as the HOA rules allowed such. Issue number 2. The HOA decided to pay the contractor in full before a single hammer had been swung and a single nail had been bought.
I think many of you can see where this is going. My father knew he was in for it on the supposed first day of construction. 3 guys showed up at 10 a.m. and stayed until about 2 p.m.
Minimal work was done.
This continued, with 3 to 4 guys showing up 2 to 3 times a week at most, usually for half days.
Instead of perhaps a 3 to 4 month project to replace the balconies in 250 units, the project dragged on and took 2 years to complete.
By the time it was complete, the oldsters on the board who approved it had almost all either died of natural causes or moved out of the complex. Even when a mostly new board took over, because the contractor had been paid in full up front, they had no recourse beyond a lengthy court battle, which they chose not to engage in as the contract had no end date.
Icing on the cake, for the entire period of 2.5 years, residents had no use of the back decks and had to store items from there elsewhere. The rules prohibited any items on the small front balconies larger than a planter, and no exceptions were given during most of the construction. Fines were issued to people who refused to back down, including my father. So on top of having zero use of the back decks for 2.5 years, residents had living rooms crammed with outdoor furniture, grills, etc. During this 2.5-year period, it was also near impossible to sell for anything but a greatly reduced price.
I know this sounds so wild it can't be true. I wouldn't believe it had my own father not suffered through it.
Please take this experience into mind before ever buying in an HOA community if you must try to get the vibe beforehand and figure out the caliber of people on the board.
A bit of background: I purchased my condo unit over 5 years ago. It was the only place in my area I could afford at the time, as the housing market, buying and renting, wasn't as tough. My partner and I have been dealing with harassment and selective enforcement, essentially since we moved in. It has gotten way out of hand the last few years, to the point where friends have urged me to get a TRO against our property manager, and the board was scolded by the state for abusing the fire marshal for their own vindictive crusade.
Oh, the stories I could tell about this miserable place.
A few years back, I made my partner my POA for all things related to my condo, because I couldn't take the constant nasty grams I was receiving.
I requested the board direct all communications to my POA. The board refused.
So I would just reply with my POA CC'd and say, as requested, all communications must go through my POA. Eventually, it sort of worked after over a year.
They would email my POA the nasty grams, but never answer their questions. I couldn't address it at the annual meeting or run for a board seat because the board wasn't holding annual meetings or elections due to COVID.
They were just extending their terms for years.
Then they started making false accusations and reporting me to the state over and over, leading to multiple fire code investigations, all of which were unfounded. The board kept trying to come into my unit, but I refused because they weren't acting under good faith and had no justification to enter.
They told me they didn't need justification or permission and could enter any time using the master key.
So I bought a door bar. They showed up the day after the Thanksgiving holiday and attempted to force entry.
Slamming into the door after if didn't budge, pounding and shouting to my unit.
It was very unsettling. After years, the board was finally holding their first meeting, and since things had gone off completely out the rails, my partner decided to run for a seat.
I transferred my condo into a trust, maybe beneficiary, and made the trustee an LLC, of which my partner is the only member, thus making my partner the acting owner of the condo.
This made my partner eligible to run and vote.
The board refused to put my partner on the ballot, so he told the owners he was running via email so people could write him in if they couldn't attend.
The president resigned and started a smear campaign.
My partner went to the meeting and ran anyway.
All documentation required, and some additional to cover our basis, was brought to the meeting and reviewed by the board's attorney for verification of requested, although technically the board has to request it in advance upon notification, which they didn't. Some of the documentation was public and some was not, like the trust for example, but we allowed the attorney to review it all nonetheless. The attorney verified his ownership to the best of their knowledge.
My partner voted and ran for president at the last meeting, no problem from the attorney's point of view.
The board and property manager continued this huge smear campaign. The property manager passed out documents with all these violations. I never committed trespassing, illegal dog ownership, multiple fire code violations, which were state investigated and unfounded.
Despite this, my partner still runs and had the votes.
The board members threatened to resign if my partner is elected. No one cares. The property manager threatens to not work for the association if my partner is elected. The property manager, who already terminated his contract and was working month to month to prevent owners from obtaining a copy of his contract.
People started to panic.
Someone else offered to run, and my partner willingly removed themselves from the election, assuming anyone else would be a step in the right direction. Fast forward a year later, the new board is the same. Fining people insane amounts. Refusing hearings. Not providing copies of contracts or other documents. Refusing to answer questions. And far worse. The annual meeting is coming up, and the board is demanding copies of the documents provided last year to the lawyer, including a full copy of the trust with all my assets listed, which is confidential.
Letting a lawyer review it once in person is one thing, but providing it to the board to keep on file and through email, absolutely not.
As beneficiary whose confidential information it is, I refused.
My partner explained why the confidential documents would not be provided and requested the bylaw or state law that required us to provide any of these documents at all, stating we would comply with the appropriate laws. But nothing more.
In response, the board revoked voting rights for my unit, and we are both banned from attending the annual meeting. They did not provide any justification, bylaws, or state law that provided them this absolute power. We were told to direct questions concerns to the CPA.
We have been calling for months, no response. The board was made aware 3 times and didn't acknowledge. Just asked for even more documents, some of which don't even exist because they aren't applicable, and reiterated that the revoking of my unit's vote and attendance at the meeting.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.